Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets this evening?
We have regrets from Councillor Sandhu.
Thank you. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I don't see any. And so I wonder if two of you would move and second to get into committee of the whole. Councillor Lischina and Councillor Robertson, thank you. Any objection? And I see none, so that's carried. And now you have four. God, let me turn the page and make sure. Yeah, so we have 4 consent items, 2 public and 2 confidential. Can I have a motion for the consent items? Councillor Chisholm, thank you. Any objection? There being no objection, the consent items are adopted as presented. And that brings us to our first public hearing item, and that's the public meeting and recommendation report for the town-initiated omnibus zoning bylaw amendment. A memo was distributed to members of council this afternoon from the planning department regarding changes to the bylaw. And if there's anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca who wishes to speak to this item, they can call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following any registered delegations, and we do have a registered delegation in the person of Michael May from Delta Urban, representing the North Oakville Community Builders, Inc., as I think NOCB wants to be written out. Council, are you interested in do you have questions, or what would you like to do with this item? Councillor Adams.
I'm not sure if staff have a presentation, but if there's a delegation, then I think we should hear both.
Okay, Catherine Buckerfield, our planner, has a presentation if you desire it. And without further ado, unless I see an objection, we'll turn to her. Catherine, there you are.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Members of council and members of the public tuning in tonight's meeting. This presentation is in relation to, is the presentation up? Just need the slides, I think. It's related to item 6.1 on tonight's agenda. Perfect. Thank you so much. A town-initiated zoning bylaw amendment to zoning bylaw 2009-199 as amended has been prepared by staff in the form of an omnibus housekeeping amendment bylaw 2021-125. The purpose of this proposed omnibus amendment to the North Oakville zoning bylaw is to make a number of housekeeping, technical, and other modifications which would assist in the use and interpretation of the North Oakville zoning bylaw and implement the official plan. A report in Appendix A can be found under item 6.1 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to introduce the proposed changes to council and the public in order to seek approval from council based on the recommendations put forth by staff in the form of a decision, again noting the minor and technical nature of the proposed amendments. If there's anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. You will be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. Next slide, please. The North Oakville zoning bylaw applies to all lands north of Dundas Street and south of Highway 407. These lands are affected by the proposed amendments to the text and mapping. A number of individual sites are also affected by the proposed amendment through amended site-specific regulations. Next slide, please. Amendments are proposed to sections 1 to 9 and sections 11 and 12 of the North Oakville zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. This slide reflects the various definitions identified by staff to date that are required required modification and are captured within the staff report and draft bylaw. The proposed changes to these definitions do not alter development rights as they pertain to the existing zone provisions. Rather, they tidy up the wording to provide clarity on the permitted uses and performance standards. Next slide, please. Key proposed amendment is the renaming of the existing development ED zone to future development FD zone. This change is proposed to emphasize the intention for lands in this zone for future development in accordance with the town's official plan, secondary plans, regional official plan, and provincial policies beyond what is currently existing on the property in the fullness of time. None of the zone provisions will change, but the intention of the zone would be clearer to the users of the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. I would also like to highlight that staff are recommending an update to draft bylaw 2021-125, which is Appendix A to the staff report dated October 19th, 2021, to correct a typo that referenced zoning bylaw 2014-014 rather than zoning bylaw 2009-189. The notice that went out to the public was clear that the amendment was to zoning bylaw 2009-189, so this can be corrected without further notice being required. Staff are also recommending to remove provisions that proposed amendments to footnotes under sections 7.6.2 and 7.7.2 of zoning bylaw 2009-189 as amended, related to the height of a one-story addition that is permitted to project into a rear yard. Staff have received letters expressing concerns with these proposed provisions and requesting further consultation with staff. Staff would like the opportunity for further review and discussion and to explore the best approach to ensure the intent of these footnotes are maintained. An amendment to these provisions may be brought back to council through another housekeeping amendment at a later date. As a result, a revised version of draft bylaw 2021-125 addressing this correction and removal of these provisions is before council for consideration. Staff will continue to monitor the effectiveness of the North Oakville zoning bylaw and its implementation in order to identify future housekeeping items to assist landowners and make the document more user-friendly. Next slide, please. In conclusion, Mayor Burton, staff put forth the following revised recommendation as shown for council's consideration. Any additional comments received tonight will form part of the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, I believe that the registered delegation is next, if you wish. Madam Clerk, would you call the delegation?
The delegation is Michael May from Delta Urban.
Welcome, Mr. May. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for allowing me to delegate this evening. As mentioned, my name is Mike May and I am Delta Urban. We are managers for the North Oakville Community Builders, Inc. The NOCB, as we refer to ourselves, comprised of the major landowners in the ward subject to the zoning bylaw amendment. Earlier today, we did circulate a formal delegation letter, which included some technical details with our concerns, but most notably, I'd like to note that the serious concern here is that NOCB was not consulted throughout the preparation of this bylaw amendment. While we appreciate staff's quick response today to address some of the concerns, we believe that at this time it is appropriate that council defer this bylaw so that a single housekeeping bylaw can be coordinated and the NOCB landowners and other impacted parties are able to provide input to this process. So at this time, I do recommend, and it is our request, that to allow additional coordination, that the proposed changes do not get supported by council tonight, and that a consultation process with the NOCB landowners and, as mentioned, other owners is able to take place. Thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you very much for your information. Are there questions of the delegate? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to share your request with us.
You're welcome. Thanks again.
The commissioner is here, Mr. Garby, and counsel, on your behalf, I'll ask him for staff commentary on deferring the whole thing as opposed to deleting the item that they had expressed, that someone had expressed concern about. Mr. Garby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If the concern is timing, it can certainly wait if it's council's desire to have staff undertake a confirmation from the Knockbee owners that the changes are acceptable and appropriate, and we can bundle it back and bring it back as one package if that's council's desire. We believe that the balance of the changes are not substantive or not offensive, but in the interest of a consultation, if it's council's desire, we can certainly bring that back at a future time.
All right, counsel, what's your wish? Councillor Chisholm.
Your worship, I move for deferral.
Thank you, councillor. Is there an objection to the deferral? Councillor Adams?
But I just want to clarify with our staff. So I've reviewed the material and I agree with them. It doesn't look to me like anything is offensive, I'll say, to anybody's desire to build and move forward. Is that true? And would we be putting ourselves in the alternative? Are we causing ourselves trouble by not moving forward with the other amendment?
I'll repeat what Commissioner Garby said. We aren't putting ourselves in any jeopardy, and we could therefore afford to extend the courtesy of a consulting delay with Knockbee, even though the items, as you say, are incredibly minor in nature.
Okay.
So,
Could staff give us an indication of when it'll come back?
Mr. Garby?
At this time, Mr. Mayor, my suggestion is that we bring it back in January.
All right. The commissioner says that they can bring it back in January. Are we content? I take no side on this question. I'm merely asking questions to make sure everybody's interests are served here. All right. The motion's on the floor from Councillor Chisholm to defer. Any objection? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, the motion to defer carries. The next item on the agenda is the discussion item. This is the recommendation report for the town-initiated official plan amendment concerning the Bronte Go major transit station area. And we have a presentation from Brad Sunderland, our planner, and a delegation from Leo Longo of Aird and Beerless, representing Roddenberry Investments Group, which, as I recall, is a proximate landowner, and we'll hear from him after we hear from Mr. Sunderland. Mr. Sunderland, Council is looking forward to your presentation.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This is the recommendation meeting for the town-initiated official plan amendment for the Bronte Go major transit station area. It represents official plan amendment number 41 to the town's livable Oakville plan. The staff report is found as item 7.1 on tonight's agenda, and the recommended official plan amendment is attached as Appendix A to the staff report. Tonight's presentation will provide a bit of background on the Bronte Go MTSA study. However, the main focus of the presentation tonight will be on the changes made to the official plan amendment since the version that was presented to council at the statutory public meeting held on May 10th of this year. Council will see that the official plan amendment for the Bronte Go area has not changed significantly since the initial presentation in May, but most changes made are in response to comments received, as well as required consistency and conformity with provincial and regional plans. And at tonight's meeting, staff are seeking a council decision to approve the recommended official plan amendment number 41 for the Bronte Go MTSA. Next slide, please. So before we get underway with tonight's presentation, if there is anyone watching on the live stream of this meeting at oakville.ca and wishes to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. And you'll be called upon following any registered delegations. Next slide, please. So the Bronte Go MTSA study was subject to an extensive study process, and council will recall this graphic and the study process from previous presentations to Planning and Development Council. But just to provide a brief highlight, the study was broken out into 5 phases, with each study phase supported by public engagement, including public workshops and information sessions, online surveys, meeting directly with landowners, and providing ward councillor briefings. The project was also supported by a technical advisory committee that provided detailed comment as the study progressed, and that was made up of staff from the town's various departments, Halton Region staff, school boards, Halton Region Conservation Authority, as well as Metrolinx. Phase 1 of the study began in late 2018 and included a background research stage, including developing a vision and guiding principles for the Bronte Go area. Phase 2 included the creation of development scenarios to consider how the Bronte Go area may redevelop over time. Phase 3 included the completion of a number of detailed technical studies required to support a preferred plan, as well as the evaluation of draft development scenarios. Phase 4 included incorporating all study findings to develop a draft preferred area-specific plan for the Bronte Go MTSA. We're currently in Phase 5, enabling the plan. The first part of Phase 5 was the presentation of a final area-specific plan to Planning and Development Council on March 8th of 2021. At that meeting, Council directed staff to prepare a town-initiated official plan amendment substantially in accordance with the area-specific plan and report back at a future statutory public meeting. The statutory public meeting was held on May 10th of this year, where Council was able to provide comment and solicit comments from the public. And we are currently in the last part of Phase 5, and that's tonight's meeting, which is the presentation of a recommended official plan amendment for the Bronte Go MTSA, which fully considers and appropriately addresses comments received. Tonight's report and presentation to Council represents the conclusion of the Bronte Go MTSA study, where town staff are seeking Council decision to approve an official plan amendment for the Bronte Go MTSA. Next slide, please. So this slide will also be familiar to Council as it was presented at the STAT public meeting on May 10th, but it's important to reiterate the land use planning context planners must work within. Planning Ontario is governed by legislation and policies at the provincial, regional, and local levels, and all planning decisions carried out by the town must either be consistent with or conform to provincial and regional plans and policies. In regard to planning for major transit station areas, there are a number of policies that must be considered as part of the town's policy framework. The staff report provided this evening, including Appendix 3, demonstrates how the recommended official plan amendment for the Bronte Go MTSA is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms or does not conflict with the applicable provincial plans, the regional official plan, including the recently adopted Regional Official Plan Amendment 48 that defines a regional urban structure, the Livable Oakville Plan, as well as having regard for matters of provincial interest and representing good planning. Next slide, please. As part of the town's ongoing official plan review, Council adopted Official Plan Amendment 15 to the Livable Oakville Plan for a townwide urban structure, which is now in full force and effect. The urban structure provides for the long-term protection of natural heritage, public open space and cultural heritage resources, maintains the character of residential areas, and is the foundation that provides overall context for where and how the town will grow, and directs growth to identified nodes and corridors. Within the town's urban structure, the Bronte Go station is identified as a major transit station area, which is to accommodate transit supportive growth and intensification. The area is to be studied to provide updated and new policies, delineate boundaries, the mix of land uses, and the intensity and scale of development. Next slide, please. The Bronte Go MTSA study and recommended OPA before you this evening implements the town's approved urban structure, and the effect of the recommended OPA continues to include updates to the general policies and schedules, which identify the Bronte Go station as a protected major transit station area and strategic growth area. It updates the policies pertaining to the Spears Road Corridor Special Policy Area, which would no longer apply to the area forming part of the protected Bronte Go MTSA. It includes the introduction of area-specific policies for the Bronte Go MTSA, the introduction of new definitions into the Livable Oakville Plan, and provides updates to mapping and the introduction of a land use, building height, density, transportation, and urban design schedule for specific to the Bronte Go MTSA. Next slide, please. So you'll all be familiar with the subject lands for the Bronte Go area. It's comprised of approximately 146 hectares of land around the Bronte Go station and are generally bound by the QEW to the north, 14 Mile Creek to the east, the established residential community to the south, and Westgate Road and the employment area to the west. The lands are currently occupied entirely by low-rise employment uses, including industrial uses. And the Bronte Go station is located at the center of the subject lands, surrounded by Go surface parking areas. The Lakeshore West Go line and rail corridor runs east-west through the middle of the subject lands, with the utility corridor abutting the northern side of the railway, which can generally be seen as the green linear open area on the air photo. Next slide, please. The subject lands were delineated as part of the Bronte Go MTSA study in coordination with Halton Region. And the final delineation of the subject lands is the responsibility of Halton Region and was included as part of Regional Official Plan Amendment 48 adopted by Regional Council in July of this year. There are no changes proposed to the delineated boundary of the MTSA in the recommended OPA from the boundary previously presented to Council at the statutory public meeting. The delineated boundary conforms to the Regional Official Plan. Next slide, please. So the next few slides highlight some of the changes to the OPA mapping from the previous version presented in May, and it also highlights some of the changes to the formatting of the OPA. So one of the first changes to the OPA is that the town's new urban structure, OPA 15, is now in full force and effect. So given this, the recommended area of change shown in the red box identifies the Bronte Go lands as a growth area node, which is in the maroon shading within the town's new urban structure. It's also identified as a major transit station area. Next slide, please. In regard to Schedule F, which is the Southwest land use, no further changes are made since the statutory public meeting, and the Bronte Go MTSA would no longer be subject to the Spears Road Corridor Special Policy Area, and it is now recognized as a growth area. The mapping change shows this in the purple shading. Next slide, please. In regard to Schedule C, which is the townwide transportation plan, no further changes are made to the OPA since the statutory public meeting, and a new road, new north-south road, which is the extension of Westgate Road from Wycroft Road in the north to Spears Road in the south, with a grade separated crossing at the rail corridor, continues to be proposed. Next slide, please. In regard to Schedule D, which is the townwide active transportation plan, no further changes are made to the OPA since the statutory public meeting, and a new network of buffered bike lanes and multi-use trails continue to be proposed for the Bronte Go MTSA, coordinated with future public roads and a proposed open space network. Next slide, please. So in regard to the policies specific to Bronte Go, a new section 27 of, to the Livable Oakville Plan continues to be proposed, and it provides a policy framework specific to Bronte Go, MTSA. And these policies prevail in the case of conflict with the general townwide policies in the Livable Oakville Plan. A small amendment is made to the framework with the inclusion of an exceptions policy and section to reflect policy changes made for a land use exception being introduced to permit the existing outdoor operations associated with the asphalt facility located at 731 Third Line. And that was in response to comments received through the statutory public meeting process. Next slide, please. So just to help orient council on the next few slides, the maps shown here are specific to the Bronte Go MTSA. And the areas of change on these slides are shown in the red squares and the boxes. And the small map in the top left corner shows the previous mapping that was presented at the statutory public meeting in May. And these changes represented on these maps are in response to comments received, as well as consistency and conformity with regional and local plans. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the area of change in the large box configured in an east-west direction along the rail corridor. So the lands in this area have been redesignated to parks and open space, as well as utility, and represent the lands occupied by the existing utility corridor and rail station, which limit redevelopment potential in this area, given underground utilities. The park and open space designation reflects the east-west open space corridor that is planned in this area, providing for passive open space and active transportation connections. And the utility designation recognizes the existing rail station and permits uses associated with the rail station. The second area I just want to draw your attention to is the area of change in the large north-south configured box. And this change highlights an adjustment to the district boundaries shown in the thick gray outline. Firstly, the station district, which is centered around the GO train station, has been expanded westward in response to comments received for lands both north and south of the rail corridor. The station district is intended to provide for the tallest buildings and highest densities within the MTSA as it's closest to the major transit station. The expansion of the boundary is proposed as it reflects the area within less than 5-minute walking distance to the rail station and is contextually appropriate to provide for higher density opportunities in this area. At the south end of the area of change is the transition district, located south of Spears Road. In the previous OPA, there was an east and west transition district, and these districts have now been merged as their development objectives are the same. And when staff reviewed these districts and determined that the policy frameworks for an east and west district were duplicative and could be consolidated for clarity purposes. And finally, the area of change shown in the red box at the northeast area of the MTSA is the inclusion of a new exception policy shown as a bullet or a little circle, the black circle, which recognizes the existing asphalt facility and permits the continuation of outdoor storage and processing associated with this site. And the exception policy was added in response to comments received. Next slide, please. So in regard to Schedule S2, building heights, the area of change shown in red outline considers increased building height potential, largely in response to comments received. Within the expanded station district north of Spears Road, tall buildings would now be considered given their close proximity to the rail station. These additional heights were assessed as part of the comments received and were considered contextually appropriate within the broader land use framework for the Bronte Go area. The station district continues to be the location for the concentration of the tallest buildings with the greatest mix of uses, which act as the heart of the future community that will establish itself around the Bronte Go station. Lands on the south side and adjacent to Spears Road have also been considered for mid-rise buildings in response to comments received. However, additional policies have also been introduced which consider this a transition area, and a number of urban design policies are added to ensure the appropriate transition of development towards the established residential area to the south. The new policy section for transition includes the consideration and the need for a compatible built form, an appropriate transition of height, the spatial separation of buildings, the landscape buffering. It actually requires a landscape buffer along the southern edge of the MTSA area, and it provides some flexibility for the location of the future public road in this location as a means to provide additional spatial separation. And it also introduces a 20-degree angular plane applied from the southerly lot lines of these properties above the third story to ensure that building heights are stepped down appropriately towards the residential area. Within the Spears district, in the western edge of the MTSA and north of Spears Road, mid-rise buildings are also considered given the overall context of the Bronte Go MTSA and the intended goal for the Bronte Go area to be predominantly mid-rise. This change furthers the achievement of the overall goal for the Bronte Go MTSA and is contextually appropriate in this area. Other changes that are proposed in this map are consistent with the mapping presented on the previous slide and are carried forward onto this mapping also. And those elements that are carried forward are circled in the blue in the legend. So that includes that park and open space and utility land use designation, the district boundaries being adjusted to expand the station district and consolidate the transition district, and the application of the exception bullet for the existing asphalt facility. Next slide, please. On Schedule S3, the density mapping, changes proposed again are just consistent with the mapping presented on the previous slides, and no other changes are proposed. Next slide, please. And on Schedule S4, similarly, the transportation network, changes proposed are consistent with the previous mapping presented and are carried forward onto this mapping. And again, those elements are shown circled in blue. So that in this case is the exception bullet, and no other changes are proposed. Next slide, please. On Schedule S5, urban design, there are a few modifications to the conceptual location of future park areas. So firstly, a small open space area is added to the lands north of the rail corridor shown in the red box on the right-hand side. This open space area was omitted in the previous plan, and the inclusion of this open space area provides the necessary linkage between the north-south and east-west open space corridors that are intended for passive recreation and active transportation connections. And the proposed open space on the south side of the rail corridor and adjacent to the proposed relocated bus terminal is moved slightly westward in response to comments received and allows the provision of high density development in closer proximity to transit connections and within the revised station district boundary. And again, the other changes proposed are just reflective of the previously presented changes. And in this instance is the district boundaries, which is circled in blue. Next slide, please. So the next few slides I hope to go through relatively quickly, but it just walks through the number of policy changes proposed within the revised OPA. And several of the changes are for clarification purposes or just to be consistent with policy language and approaches used throughout the Livable Oakville Plan. And other changes are in response to conformity matters with the provincial and regional planning frameworks or in direct response to comments that we received at the STAT public meeting. So firstly, the residential area. So we have reworded the terms residential neighborhood to residential area just to be better reflect the terminology used in the town's approved urban structure. Number two, for major facilities, the term major facility is added as a defined term and is introduced throughout the OPA, as this is a term used within the policy framework for sensitive land uses in the PPS and the provincial growth plan and the regional official plan, and as a proposed definition in Regional Official Plan Amendment 48. In regard to the goal statement, we've slightly revised that for clarification purposes to further explain that the heart of the community means the area where the highest densities, building heights, and mix of uses are to be located, and that's within the station district surrounding the GO station. For public roads, we've added clarification that proposed future roads within the plan are intended to be public roads. So we've added the word public in several locations. With regard to the development concept discussed earlier, we've consolidated the East and West Transition District, which has also resulted in a number of policy changes. In regard to employment, population and employment densities, we've added in the general target proportion of residents and jobs, which is 60% 60% jobs and 40% residents. And this has been added to the plan to conform with the policies in ROPA 48. We've also added that the future population and employment growth is revised and expressed as a minimum in conformity with the growth plan. And we've also added a monitoring policy to conform to ROPA 48, indicating that a strategy may need to be developed to redress the general target proportion of residents and jobs if these targets are not being achieved over the long term. Next slide, please. In regard to transportation, an edit to indicate that roads, transit, and active transportation infrastructure should be provided in accordance with the plan. And we've changed that policy wording to should from shall, as the requirement for and alignment of future roads is to be determined through future studies and the planning approval process. And in response to comments received, we've also added a policy to indicate that it's an objective that the future environmental assessment, which will be required for the Westgate Road extension, and one of the objectives will be to minimize property impacts to the extent possible, so as to maximize development opportunities on the remainder of the impacted properties. We've also added clarification around a policy that the grade separated pedestrian crossing at the rail corridor at the east end of the Bronte GO station is shown as an enhanced feature area on the urban design schedule, and that was just clarification. We've also added clarification that the trail network proposed along the 14-Mile Creek, which is north of Wycroft Road, must be supported by a future feasibility study. And that we've also added clarification that active at-grade uses should be provided within the first floor of parking structures facing public streets in all instances, and are required in locations that face a primary street, which are shown on our urban design schedule. Next slide, please. In regard to land use compatibility, we've added some clarification that major offices are also considered sensitive land use as per the policies of the growth plan, and major offices are a defined term. A revised policy also that identifies the need to be what needs to be identified or what needs to be considered as part of a compatibility assessment in conformity with ROPA 48. So there was a conformity adjustment. We've revised a policy indicating that sensitive land uses are not permitted within the minimum separation distance of a major facility, reflecting the preferred approach in the existing and emerging provincial land use compatibility guidelines. And we know that since the time that these policies have been updated, the provincial land use compatibility guidelines are no longer moving forward with those. However, the changes we made in this OPA would work in both instances. So we're fine with those revised policies. We've also revised a policy to indicate that additional technical studies might be required as part of an application for a proposed light industrial use or expansion of an existing industrial use within the Bronte Go MTSA. And that we've also provided 2 revised policies in regard to rail facilities, and that's in response to comments received from Metrolinx. And that includes vegetation zones along the railway, and that they don't want tall trees or tall vegetation, as well as the need for easements for operational emissions from the railway within 300 meters of the railway corridor. Next slide, please. In regard to urban design, we've provided a policy which revises how buildings transition down. Previously, we had a policy that spoke to transitioning down in all directions from the station district. However, the mid-rise area surrounding the station district allows for a range of building heights of 3 to 8 stories, plus an additional 4 stories, where land is given for public facilities such as roads or parks. And this flexibility does not necessarily require the transitioning down of heights from the station district. However, as I spoke about previously, we did provide new policies required in the transition area, which is south of Spears Road, which still speaks to the need to transition down in building height toward the adjacent residential area. We've also added clarification that gateway buildings or gateway locations should not only be provided with well-designed built form, but landmark built form, and that all buildings should be well-designed. And that additional, and lastly, in the urban design section is the addition of a new policy section with specific direction for the transitional area, which I spoke about earlier. In regard to land use policies, we've removed the reference to Class 2 and Class 3 industrial facilities and replaced that with the term major facilities to conform with the PPS, growth plan, and regional official plan, and provides a framework which responds to the land use compatibility guidance. We've also redesignated the lands within the utility corridor north of the railway, as I mentioned earlier, to parks and open space and utility, which reflects the intended function of that area. We revised the policies pertaining to the tools that the town may use to retain space for jobs and redevelopment in conformity with ROPA 48. We've revised building height policies to reflect the revised urban design policies introduced for transitioning to the established residential area. We've also added new policies to reflect the compatibility assessments, that compatibility assessments need to take into consideration building heights, and that building heights may be limited as a result of findings of a compatibility assessment if mitigation measures cannot appropriately address impacts as applicable. And this policy was added in response to comments received from area landowners. And we've also provided a revised policy pertaining to minimum densities in response to land use designation changes in the utility corridor, which adds the land use designation parks and open space. And so minimum densities would continue to not apply in the utility corridor. Next slide, please. In the implementation policies, we provided a number of revisions as well. So we've revised a policy that identifies that property consolidation may be required to accommodate planned intensification, and that if property consolidation cannot take place, development permissions may be limited in those instances. We've provided some clarity around a policy in response to comments received, that redevelopment of existing low-rise employment uses, they also include existing commercial and motor vehicle related uses, may occur gradually over the long term, and that building additions and alterations may be permitted without being subject to the minimum building and densities of the plan. Minimum building heights and densities of the plan. We've added a new policy to clarify how minimum building heights and minimum densities are to be interpreted when the requirement for future public roads is finalized and where those are located. We've added a new policy to provide design flexibility for the deployment of building heights across a comprehensive development plan, which would promote a variety of building forms and heights. And we've added a new policy to clarify and streamline how the transfer of minimum floor space index, or the densities, is considered when land is required to be dedicated to the town and it straddles two FSI measurements on the plan. And so it would defer to the larger FSI. Next slide, please. So next steps. So tonight's recommendation meeting, identified with the star symbol, is being held in accordance with the Plannng Act, and the recommended official plan amendment presented this evening is the outcome of a comprehensive study that advances some of the key policy directions and objectives for the town, and it's staff's recommendation that council approve the OPA. However, given this study, an OPA is taking place as part of the town's broader official plan review. Should council approve the OPA this evening, it will be forwarded to Halton Region for final approval and coordinated with the ongoing Halton Regional Municipal Comprehensive Review. And as part of that final approval process, there is an opportunity for town staff to work with regional staff to address any additional comments received at tonight's meeting, and if warranted, provide further modifications to the OPA prior to its final approval as necessary. Next slide, please. So with that, it's the recommendations in tonight's staff report is that the report be received, that the proposed town-initiated OPA be approved, that the bylaw be passed, and that notice of council's decision reflect that council has fully considered all written and oral submissions related to this matter, and that those comments have been appropriately addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sunderland. Madam Clerk, would you call the registered delegations?
We have one delegation, that's Leo Longo from Arid Burles LLP.
Welcome, Mr. Longo. We look forward to your information.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm sorry for the poor lighting from my office. The office lights went off 2 minutes ago, and I haven't been able to get the landlord to turn them back on. So in order of Halloween, I'll give you a little bit of a scary, oh, there they just came on. Look at that. Thanks, Your Worship and council members. I'll be brief because your planner Sunderland has gone through a very extensive review of the revisions that were made since the staff public meeting in May. As was noted by Your Worship, we act for Rodenberry Investment Group, 2189 Spears Road, a property that immediately abuts the south side of the tracks and is on the just to the west of the GO parking lot on the south side of the track. We made a series of suggestions and requests in our deputation to council and follow-up correspondence with staff. I'm here to say that by and large, the significant comments that we did make have been incorporated to a great extent in the revisions that are before you this evening. And it's not very often that I get to say that I'm in agreement with a report that's coming forward. And I think when staff have done a good job, this council should hear it. And that's part of the reason why I'm making the deputation, so that you are aware of that. The only other comment I'd make is this is a very significant document, and there's a lot of dense policies in it. And we certainly will take Planner Sunderland up with his suggestion that if between now and whenever this ultimately gets to regional council for approval, if there's any other nit that we see needs to be addressed, that we'll have that opportunity to do so at that time. So I won't take any more of your time, but just to say thank you for your attention. Thanks staff for their receptiveness to comments that we did make, and we look forward to seeing this document finally approved. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Longo, for such a congenial delegation. I will tell you that at the region, I anticipate that the time between January and July next year is going to be it's going to be a very fast race course. So you'll want to do those consultations sooner rather than later. Councilor O'Meara, do you have a question for Mr. Longo? All right, your hand is up. That's what misled me.
Yeah, no, I'd like to move the recommendation, Your Worship, at the appropriate time.
All right, well, thank you, Councilor O'Meara. Mr. Longo, if there's anything else, you know how to reach us.
I do. Thank you very much. Good night, all.
Good night. Councilor O'Meara has moved the recommendation, and that's in order. Is there an objection? Well, there may not be an objection. There are at least 3 hands, and we'll see what they are. We're going to start with Councilor Longo, and then Councilor Dudek, and then Councilor Hazlitt-Thiel. Councilor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to declare a potential conflict of interest. The reason for the company I work for, Mohawk Medbuy Corporation, has a joint venture warehouse at 2189. So I feel that if I voted on this, there may be a perceived conflict. So I could recuse myself from the vote.
Thank you very much, Councilor Longo. Councilor Dudek.
Trying to unmute. Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to commend staff for the excellent work they've done on this, and so, what shall I say, consultative throughout the whole process. They had numerous meetings with Councillor Chisholm and I, which was very much appreciated. Even though it isn't our ward, it does abut and does affect some of the residents in our area. So I just wanted to say job well done, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I have just a couple questions on land use compatibility. I just want to make sure I understand the policy. So I'm on page 23 and it's 27.4.5. And it says that the area shall be a class 4 area under provincial guidelines. Is that mandated by the province, or is that a choice that we've made that it be a class 4?
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor, that is a choice that we make, that we can introduce that. In the updated NPC 300 guidelines, which are provincial guidelines for noise, there are options in this particular context where it's an existing industrial area and it's transitioning to more of a mixed use with the introduction of residential uses and sensitive land uses. Those guidelines do provide options that would essentially allow for that transition to be a little bit easier when it comes to noise mitigation and noise levels. So essentially a class 4 area would allow it to be slightly bit noisier than would be otherwise. But that's just to recognize that, you know, in a lot of situations like this with an industrial area transitioning slowly over the long term, that there will be impacts in the near term as the plan evolves over time. So it provides that that additional buffer room.
Okay, so thank you for explaining that for me. And then on J, you've chosen to use the word may be required when it comes to noise, vibration study, air quality reports, or other technical and environmental reports as appropriate. Can you help me understand why you chose may, not shall, given sensitivities?
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. So we've used the word may, mostly because at the time of a development application coming forward as part of a complete application, we can identify the specific studies that are required. So if you had it as a shall, it would be required every single time. There may be certain instances over the long term that these studies, some of them might not be required in every instance. It's likelihood that they will be, but providing that may still allows us to ask for it at the time of a complete application.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Brad, congratulations on a very comprehensive report and to the staff. We've gone through a lot of phases with this plan, and I'm glad we had a lot of open meetings with the public and so forth, and with councillors. I just echo Councillor Duddick's comments too. The only question I have, when we one of the changes was the parkland open space, I guess along the GO corridor, and then you have an enhanced feature. I brought this up way back when, and it's probably still in there somewhere. It might be buried, but it's a little bit of detail. The unfortunate part of this growth is with the railway line itself. The pedestrian access underneath separation. I saw the grading separation. Is there only one area, or is there 2 or 3 areas in that whole corridor where there would be access from the north to the south for pedestrians to walk through?
Correct. So through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. So there are, third line exists today, so that is a north-south connection for pedestrians. The existing GO rail tunnel has some connections. Mind you, you have to walk across the platforms of the rail corridor to get across. And then the introduction of the new north-south road to the west end of the study area, which is the Westgate Road extension, will ultimately provide an additional crossing. The enhanced feature area shown on the plan contemplates an additional pedestrian crossing, and that would be associated with the train station itself. So if there's more direct connections available, then we would pursue that. I believe that's also reflected in the Metrolinx plan for the build out of the train station over time, just to create more porosity through the train station. So it is an objective that we will continue to pursue as the train station grows and changes.
I guess I wasn't very clear on what I'm saying, Brad. There was discussion of having specific pedestrian separation grade underneath the railway tracks for access for north and south. Yes, I understand the roadways and everything else, but the railway itself is a barrier for north and south. And the consideration down in the future to look at the pedestrian grade separation happening under the rails for people to walk back and forth. That's my only comment. Can that be considered in the long-range plan?
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. So that enhanced feature area is intended to be a pedestrian connection. It would likely be under the rail corridor. My understanding is that they don't typically do above grade crossings along the rail corridor, and typically, especially because of this rail line is to become electrified over soon, I hope. So it would likely be underground. And so that is the intent of that enhanced feature area, is that it is a pedestrian access.
But the understanding from listening to you, Brad, the understanding that's for the GO station itself. What I'm suggesting is a free-form pedestrian underpass on the underneath the rails. Is there any consideration with respect to doing that? It's just to connect up a connection between the north and south for pedestrian walkway.
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. So that particular enhanced feature area crossing, it would provide that, individual access north-south. I think it could do dual duty as well if it was functioning as part of the train station, if that provided greater amenity and access to the rail station, in addition to having north-south connections through. They have that condition in other areas like the exhibition GO train station, where they have, it is a predominant north-south pedestrian connection, but it also works to help the train and the train station function for passengers. So it's kind of multi-purpose, multi-duty.
Just the comment is my last comment on is the intensification is going on in this area. It would be nice to have pedestrian traffic flow from north to south under the rails for people to walk instead of using roadways and so forth. Just a consideration down the line that might be something to be feasible to incorporate into the plan. And I'll just leave it as that, Brad. Thank you very much for your time and an excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Well, Council, Councillor O'Meara's motion is on the floor and it's in order. May I put the vote? Is there an objection to Councillor O'Meara's motion? Madam Clerk, I see no objection and I declare the motion carried. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to item 7.3. We have a presentation from Carolyn Van Slichtenhorst, our heritage planner, who's available for questions if you want, if you need her presentation. This is the rehabilitation of the Bailey Estate Farm Manager's House at 1110 Lakeshore Road West. And if the rest of council doesn't want to do something, Councillor Duddick looks to me like is ready to move it. Councillor Duddick?
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, 7.2 is the Bailey Estate. I think you said 7.3, but regardless. I just wanted to share the good news with the other members of council that it in fact is a family member, a descendant of the Bailey family that has purchased this property and is working so well with our heritage staff to conserve it and build a home that will be in keeping with the area. So it's a good news story.
Thank you, Councillor Duddick. I'll put the vote. Is there an objection to Councillor Chisholm? Are you?
I'm not sure if my colleague moved the motion. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your help. Is there an objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, I see no objection and the motion's carried. That brings us to 7.3 for real. I misspoke when Councillor Duddick was right. It was 7.2. This is the conservation plan and bylaw for Knox Presbyterian Church on the 1150 Dundas Street West. And Susan Shepard is available if you have questions. On the other hand, if you already know what you want to do, Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Worship. I'd be pleased to move it. I just want to draw council's attention to the fact that this is a property that has accessed funds through the Heritage Grant Program. And given that they are a somewhat smaller congregation than some of our other churches in town, they should be commended for the work and the effort that they're putting in to conserve this property. And I'd also like to commend Susan Shepard for her work, working with them and guiding them throughout the process. It's been a delight to see.
Thank you, Councillor Duddick. As a Presbyterian myself, I'm very sensitive to the incredible minority status of my religion. But anyway, thank you for the motion. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, I see no objection and the motion carries. Thank you, everybody. That lets us move to the advisory committee minutes, 9.1. And what we have here is a recommendation pertaining to item 4.1 of the Heritage Committee minutes from its meeting October 19th to approve, and the remainder of the minutes to be received. And let me see if, Councillor Giddings has his hand up. Perhaps he'll move all this.
I would be happy to do so.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giddings. Is there any objection? There being no objection, congratulations, Councillor Giddings, your motion carries. Is there someone who would like to move that we rise and report to council? Councillor Grant, thank you for that. Is there any objection? Councillor Duddick.
Sorry, Your Worship, just some clarification. I know my colleague moved the consent items, and I believe along the consent for the confidential. If we pass that, is that going with the recommendation of staff? Because there were 3 options contained within the report. So I just wanted clarification that in fact, it's option 3.
Yes, it's the recommendation of staff.
Thank you.
All righty. So there's no objection to Councillor Giddings' motion, and we are looking, and I'm calling the vote on rising and reporting Councillor Grant's motion. Any objection? Seeing none, Councillor Grant, your motion carries. Thank you very much. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent items 4.1 and .2, confidential consent items 5.1 and .2, public hearing item 6.1, discussion items 7.1, .2, and .3, and advisory committee minutes item 9.1 is noted by the clerk. A mover and seconder for this report would be welcome. Councillor Grant and Councillor Lischuna, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that. I was looking at Councillor Knoll and said your name, but there you go. It's the hour, I suppose. Moved by Councillor Knoll, seconded by Councillor Lischuna. Any objection? There being none, that's carried, everybody. Now, we come to new business of an emergency congratulatory or condolence nature. And I'll look and see if anybody has anything. Thank you. Then it's in order for a mover and seconder for consideration reading of the bylaws. Right. And as the clerk has noted, we're removing 21-125, which we deferred. Councillor Elgar, moving it? Thank you. And seconder is Councillor Longo. Thank you. Any objection? There being none, the bylaws are considered read and passed. And that ends our meeting. Thank you, everybody. It's been terrific working with you, and see you next time.